Hi everybody and welcome. If you've been here for the last 10 minutes with us, thank you very much for your patience. We are now going to get started with this alumni talk and discussion, and we are super happy to have with us today Josh Sauerman, the creative director at Animax Designs. Josh Sauerman is a natural storyteller, and as a creative director, animator, and illustrator, he has brought characters to life for millions of people, from guests experiencing animatronic creatures of his design at theme parks around the world to mobile games, music videos, television commercials, and VR/AR experiences. Josh actually studied at the University of Chicago graduated in 2007 with a mathematics degree, which is really cool. And then went on later down the line to go to an animation mentor and entering a career-related animation and character design. He lives currently in Nashville, Tennessee with his wife, Emily, their daughters, Elizabeth and Abigail, and their dog, Archie, which I hope we eventually do see pictures of Archie. I love dog pics. And I'm just super excited to hear about his current work and his trajectory, because I think a lot of people will relate to this as they kind of navigate and graduate from University of Chicago, especially recent alums, if anyone's listening to this later down the line. Before the Media Art Data Design Center, I know that it's hard to navigate and kind of jump from UChicago onwards. So this is super interesting to hear. And thank you so much for being with us. I'll hand it over to you so that you can kind of go back over what I just said, but with more detail and more oomph than I can ever do. So thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Jazz. Thank you, Ashlyn. I really appreciate the invite. It's awesome to hear about the MADD Center and all the stuff that is going on at U of C. You know, it didn't really exist when I was there when I graduated in 2007. You know, there's so much cool stuff that's at the university now that I'm excited to see is developing, and all you that are taking advantage of it. So yeah, really appreciate you having me here. I'm going to walk a little bit through just kind of my career, my direction, who I am a little bit, and then some of the work that I've done, and I'm excited to show it all to you. So thanks everybody for coming as well. So obviously my name is Josh. I'm 36 years old. I'm from Crown Point, Indiana, which is about 45 minutes outside Chicago. So Northwest Indiana, right south of the steel mills. Live in Nashville, Tennessee, like Jazz mentioned. And here's a picture of my family. There's the picture of my dog. So there's Archie. So he's about 7 years old. I guess I didn't put his age down there, but he was the first thing that we got when we moved to Nashville, and wanted it to feel like home. So after our transition to Chicago, so I lived in Crown Point, then lived in Chicago, basically starting from when I went to U of C, and was there for about a decade before moving down here. The bottom corner is I do our Christmas card every year to kind of show where we are in life. And this is where we are in life with small children baking things, and the youngest one being the one that keeps us on our toes the whole time. So I grew up as a theme park kid, right? I was lucky enough to have a family that loved particularly the Disney parks. My grandparents loved doing it. So it was a real kind of great family experience that my parents and my brother and my grandparents and I would do ever since I was little. So I'm the little kid with the glasses in the far left corner. On a day that we went to Disney World back when I was like 2 years old, and apparently it was like 28 degrees or something that day, and they had to buy coats for us, and it froze the Florida crop that year. It was like 1988 or something. But yeah, it was very formative. We basically had one vacation we would do as a family, and it was to go down to Disney World, go down to Orlando. We had some family down there as well who we'd go and see. And so I really got interested early in that world. And it has been fun to be able to introduce my own kids to that world and to bring the next generation in. So got to experience, as I've gotten older, experienced the Harry Potter side, the whole Universal side, Transformers, the cool IPs that they have in addition to Disney. So yeah, I really enjoyed that world and was interested in it. I never really thought of myself as working in that world. I just was more of a consumer and a guest of it, like I would guess most of you are if you've got to experience any of these things. So yeah, theme park life, kind of this is the way for my family. But my background was really falling in love with animation, and that was a kind of the connector from the theme park world to what I really wanted to do. And so I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but when the Disney Hollywood studios were first opened as the Disney MGM studios in 1989, they were actually opened with a Florida animation studio. And so this was before computer animation hit, so it was all still 2D animation. And we did a trip down there when I was, I guess, about 8 years old. So it's looked about like this in 1994. Was a really cool place because you could do the tour of the Disney studios and they'd kind of do this video with Robin Williams and Walter Cronkite that would introduce you to how animation worked and kind of the story of Disney animation. And then you could actually walk through and see the animators doing the work. You could stand kind of at these windows and watch them draw, watch them kind of flip through their pages. And that whole notion of bringing things to life and telling these stories in that way, bringing new characters to life, was just really life-changing for me. And so I remember that we went through this event or this tour, and my dad stayed back with me because he couldn't pull me away. I was like 8 years old. And I just stood there and watched as actually someone drawing young Simba from The Lion King, because The Lion King was made out of the Florida studio, at least a large part of it was. And so the tour went on, and the Disney folks were generous enough to let us stay behind. And I just stood there for again, like an hour, just watching this animator at his work. And I thought it was just the most incredible thing. So if you ever watch, there's an episode of, I think, Full House from like 1993, where they go to Disney World and they actually go through this experience. And so you can see what it was like. Unfortunately, that's all closed now. But so, like I said, The Lion King was a huge thing for me. I was always a kid who loved zoology and animals, used to go to the zoo a lot, and you could find me on most weekends in the backyard, like finding animals and just exploring the woods. And I loved watching nature documentaries, things like that. So the combination of those interests was just really huge for me. And obviously, if you lived through that, you understand how Lion King was a massive hit, right? And it was a sleeper hit that nobody kind of expected it to be as big as it was. And it's still a great movie that I've introduced my oldest daughter to, and we've gotten to watch together, which is really exciting. So that really inspired me to try my hand at animation, right? I love drawing. My parents talked about as a kid that I would, when I didn't have the motor skills to draw, that I would try to get them to draw, and I would get really angry if they didn't do it exactly how I wanted to. So, that I would start sobbing because the eyeball of the hippo wasn't in the right place. We came home, and a couple years later, as technology started to develop somewhat more, and I had a better understanding of how to use things. I guess I was a teenager. My dad and I built an animation desk. So we found, so you can see the light box there, and I actually still have that in my house here. It's a real treasured possession, both as, a great kind of bonding experience with my dad, but also this thing that gave me the opportunity to then start drawing my own pictures, right? And so these are very, very rudimentary animations that I did early on, of like walk cycles and random like person waking up and scratching their head, right? Doing a little more kind of slightly rotoscope style, but trying to make my own character of trying to do animal locomotion. Like I said, Lion King was really, really inspiring to me. So this idea of character, of storytelling, of bringing something to life that was totally unique, again, was really inspiring to me. But then something big happened, which was Toy Story came out, right? So that happened in 1995, which again, when we look at how movies are made today, it's hard to remember how kind of earth-shattering that was when that first 3D film came out. And it's still a fantastic film, another one that I've watched with my kids that they really enjoy, and I still really enjoy. But that kind of introduced this entire new world of animation and this technological side that I'd never really thought about before. And so I was really into watching the making of for these sorts of things. And so there's a great, let's see, can you go to the next one? There we go. So this is a quick video just kind of showing some of the process. This is the kind of stuff that I watched and got really, really fascinated by, of how they made these characters come to life. So hopefully, let me know if you can't hear the audio.
One of the things that makes Toy Story so unique is the collaboration between traditionally trained artists and animators and these amazing computer geniuses.
So my big job today is to act like an angry potato.
Here's how it works. From the storyboards, the technical directors model the characters in 3 dimensions within the computer. Then the animators, like Pete Doctor, test the models of the characters to see if the animation variables, or AVARs, work correctly.
I would just make sure that each pose is pushed about as far as I can get it. And then I've tested a lot of the expressions. He's got great snarls and sneers.
So that crossing of technology and of art, and the way that those things kind of feed each other and challenge each other was really, really inspiring to me.
One other thing,
I started diving into trying to make my own stuff. Around the same time, I was getting into Star Wars. I think you can kind of see a theme here of like the types of movies and things that I really enjoyed. And that was around the time that Star Wars: The Phantom Menace came out, which, you know, for all the issues of that movie, right, and the how debatable the quality of that movie was, the big thing that was just amazing about it again was the graphics, right? So I started filming myself and trying to add lightsabers to myself swinging around, trying to see how I could merge those 2 worlds of and do that kind of special effects work. So I did some really early, you know, this is early 3D modeling that I did, starting to try to see again like how an animal might work, how a whale might swim. The body mechanics on this are not super hot, but this was me learning how the software actually worked, just like really diving in and trying to figure it out. So this was using the early days of Blender. If anybody's played with Blender 3D, which is great because it's free, right? So I had access to that, whereas a lot of the programs that existed at the time, you had to pay thousands of dollars to get access to them. So I remember going to the bookstore and getting a 3D Studio Max book that had a CD with it. And I thought that the CD was the software itself. And I was like horrified to find that I had bought this book on how to use this software, and it had only included a couple of videos for the tutorials from the book itself. But like a lot of things in life, you know, so if this all seems like I was going in a clear direction, I was not really going in a clear direction, because it turns out that there's a lot more other stuff. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of things that I'm interested in. So, you know, it seemed like life would go one way, didn't quite go the way that I thought. So there's a ton of things that I like and am interested in. Some of those are entertainment related, but I also love history. I love public policy and law and economics and math and cooking and gardening and zoology and animals and museums and education and all this kind of other stuff, right? So as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and people are, as you start looking at colleges and things like that, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I probably shouldn't go to art school. At least that's what I was kind of led to believe. Mostly because I was like, where would I ever get a job? As much as I loved things like animation, I never really seriously considered that could be a career path. And similarly with whether 3D or 2D. And because I had these broad interests, that's kind of what led me to the University of Chicago. So I'd been, because of the broad liberal arts education, because it wasn't too far away, because I had done pretty well in school. And so there's kind of that desire to see like how can I really challenge myself in the next step, which ended up being a great experience overall. It took me in a very different direction than I would have expected, but is all still kind of part of the story that leads to where I am today. And again, like I said, U of C did not have a lot of the resources that are available now, especially in the arts kind of space, the arts and technology space. It was very much still the liberal arts school, which it still is and offers great things. And so I got that really broad education. But also, like I said, you know, math and economics were both of interest to me when I showed up. I took a class and our faculty fellow was a lecturer named Alan Sanderson. I don't know. Honestly, I don't even know if he's still lecturing at U of C or if anybody knows him, but I was in Chamberlain House at Burton Judson Courts, and he's he was our faculty fellow there, and just a really fascinating guy, really great to talk to. I took a class with him, and the classic saying that I remember him saying was, going to the University of Chicago and at least not taking an economics class is like going to the Sistine Chapel and not looking up. And so I thought that was an interesting point to make. So I got kind of into that economics and math world, because they both really fascinated me a lot. So my great white whale, you know, that I'm still chasing, the Moby Dick that I'm still battling is this complex analysis book. That's the one that was kind of my final math class that I wish that I could say that I really creamed it. I have a good math mind, but I do not have a brilliant math mind like so many of my classmates at U of C did, and I'm sure so many of you do. But I love how the logic plays and how you have to think through how math isn't arithmetic, right? That was a big lesson at U of C, but how mathematics is logic. Mathematics is how things work, how systems work, how you prove things based on the rules of the system that you create, which obviously affects gamification too. And I've realized how much I enjoy that. Part of what attracts me to storytelling and to how we gamify things and even to technology is being able to think through how do these logical paths work? What are your kind of if-then statements? What are your different ways you can go? Because that's in a lot of ways even what story, even with all its messiness, is telling a good story, is telling a good series of if-then statements and seeing how different situations play out across time. So kind of going with the theme, I took all those classes, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with any of them. So I graduated with a degree in mathematics and thought, well, I'm not good enough at math and not honestly interested enough in math to go into academia with mathematics. And like I said, things that interested me as well were, I've always had an interest in history and in government and in law. And so as I kind of went through what my options are, of course, a lot of my classmates were going into iBanking, things like that from the economics department, but I never really had much of an interest in finance. That's not a big motivator for me, is that kind of world. I didn't think that academia was really where I should go, so I cut that out. And honestly, in my mind, art was kind of this weird world, right? It wasn't a world where you were doing the kind of filmmaking and that storytelling that I was thinking about. I took one art class at U of C, and back then it was very, very experimental, and so it was a lot more of kind of like the famous furry teacup, right? And that kind of fine art world is one that I enjoy going into, like for a museum or a gallery opening or something, but is not necessarily what I feel kind of I tell. So I ended up looking at the government route. That's really what I thought about. So I thought that I might want to go to law school, but I didn't want to dive into that without really knowing if that was a certain thing. So I decided to become a paralegal, and I got a job at the U.S. Department of Justice in Chicago. As you can see, this is the meandering path, right? How does this all relate to filmmaking? How does this all relate to animatronics? How does this relate to themed entertainment? So I spent about 4 years at the Department of Justice, realizing about a year or two in that I didn't want to be an attorney, that as much as I enjoy government and law and all that kind of stuff, it wasn't something that I wanted to do as a career. So I was kind of stuck in this place of, what do I do with my life? And this is around the time that blogs were big, Google Reader was still a thing. And I realized that I was just I started following all these people who were in the animation industry, kind of going back to that original love that I had in concept artists and people developing games and people developing special effects and all that. And I remember sitting down with Emily, my now wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and just saying, I don't think I want to do law. And she was like, yeah, we all know that, which, sometimes you're the last person to learn things about yourself, or you're the last person to realize, I guess. So luckily she was very encouraging about kind of looking at the next step. And so that's where I found Animation Mentor, which still exists, is out there. I was one of the first classes to do Animation Mentor. It's a very cool program. It's an online program, but it's taught by people who are working in the field of animation. So my teachers, my mentors for that were animators at Pixar, animators at Disney, animators at DreamWorks, and at other studios around. So you learn a lot about, it's focused on character animation, and on that kind of storytelling and on how to get a job in that field and how to really do that stuff well. So we don't have to watch the whole thing, but I
Parakeet Petey
put together a demo reel.
He's dead. Oh, what happened? His head fell off. His head fell off.
It's from the classic Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah, it was pretty old.
So we don't have to watch the whole thing, but yeah, I started the DOJ in the fall of 2007. And for those of you who remember a little bit of your recent history, is about 6 or 8 months later, the bottom fell out of the US economy, right? So everything collapsed, the financial market collapsed. Jobs were suddenly incredibly hard to find right at the time that I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do that wasn't law, and trying to go into a world to get a job in the entertainment industry. So when I left, it wasn't the worst of times, but it was certainly far from the best of times. And so I just began looking, right? And so I became a freelancer, which oftentimes feels like that's just a fancy word for being unemployed. After a couple months and a year or so of freelancing, you know, people stop asking about your job search. They stop asking about what's going on in your life. And the whole time I was just applying and applying and applying. So I probably applied to 85 or 90 different places. Obviously my resume was very light on entertainment and very heavy on law and mathematics, which are not really the places that animation hires are found. And so I got interviews with Nickelodeon, with Pixar, with Cartoon Network. Those are kind of the big three that I got multiple round interviews, but never quite landed the job, right? So I reached this kind of, I was in this cycle that happens, which if any of you have seen this before or thought about this, this is a chart that I kind of keep with myself that basically, it reminds you that you kind of go back and forth in your life in your life of being an artist, of where you have these highs where you think you're doing really well, but usually you're in those moments, your ability to critique yourself are not as good as they should be. And then you get better at critiquing yourself, and you actually feel like you're getting worse at your craft, even as you're getting better at your craft. And then you get better at critiquing yourself, and you recognize kind of how good you want to be, but how you're not quite there yet. And so that year and a half was full of a lot of highs and lows of feeling like, yeah, I can totally do this. I have the skills for this. And then thinking, there's no way, this is a complete waste of time. Maybe I should go back to law, even knowing that that's a place where I'm not going to be happy. So I drew this picture at one point, just a quick sketch in an afternoon in the wintertime in Chicago, where I was like wrapped in a blanket and like, what am I doing with my life? Right. So everything felt pretty low at that point. And then I got this random email. So this is the part of my story where I was working really hard. I was keeping a blog at the time. I was keeping a portfolio up. I was just posting constantly of pictures and trying to connect with people. And someone happened to see that. And it was this guy named Chuck Fawcett, who's the founder of Animax Designs, which is, he reached out and said, hey, I'm the owner of this puppet company in Nashville that does animatronics as well. And we're looking at growing. We want to get really into the technology field. I found your stuff. You seem like you might be an interesting person because you make your own puppets, you do this animation, but you also have this math mind that I think might work with our engineers. So are you interested in this world? And I was completely taken aback, like, what kind of thing falls out of the sky like this? And so, yeah, I connected with him. He was coming to Chicago for a convention, and we met up. He was actually working on characters for Universal's Diagon Alley at the time. So Animax did all of the figures outside of Diagon Alley, so not inside the Goblin ride, but everything that's external, like the snakes and the birds and the snails and all that. And so I did most of the concept art for that, for Animax, and worked with Universal on that. And that was kind of my first foray into Animax. And so this is the kind of stuff that Animax does, which it doesn't cover everything that I'm interested in by any means, but it certainly covers a lot, right? So every day is a new day. Every day is an interesting day. Every day is unique there, given all the cross-disciplinary stuff that we do. So I guess, what do I do, right? What is a day like at Animax Designs? What do we do? So as a creative director, there's a couple of things that I do, right? I'm responsible for working with clients that we have. And so our clients, and you'll see on the next slide, we work with really kind of everybody across the board, but I work with whoever those clients are who are coming to us with some kind of a vision. Sometimes they know exactly what they want. Sometimes they have no idea what they want. And so I work with them to kind of define what they want that vision to be, and then see it through to completion. So define that intent and get it to them so they're happy with it. That can be, sometimes it's puppets, sometimes it's static figures, sometimes it's very highly complex animatronics that have all kinds of, needs for whatever the show is. So I directly supervise a couple of art directors and then a team of digital artists, riggers, and animators who do 3D art in Maya, Autodesk Maya, and sometimes do concept art, sometimes do some of that other stuff as well, but primarily that group. Then I kind of define like what quality means for Animax, right? What is our selling point? And we brand ourselves as a very high quality thing, right? We give you the best in the business. So our director of production, who's a good friend, he regularly says to the folks in the production side, as they're building it, he says, it needs to look expensive because it is expensive, right? So we care about what the insides of things look like and the outsides of things. We want the mechanisms to be beautiful. We want the shells to be beautiful. We want the fur and the costumes and all those kinds of things to be well thought out and nice looking. Then the other two big things is really kind of the technological side, is use the creative, the needs of creative, or what cool future desires I might want to see, or I working with our internal creative studio, with our parent company, which is called City Neon, and they're based out of Singapore, to develop this cool new stuff, right? What are the next things, and challenge the technology people on our team to do those new things, right? And that's one of the most exciting things, is what is next? What's the cutting edge? And our goal has always been like, the standard in the animatronics industry has always been Disney Imagineering, right? They're the ones who set what the next thing is. Our kind of stated goal has always been to take over, right? To be a step ahead of Imagineering, not to be a step behind, but to always be a step ahead. So they're trying to catch up with us, and we're certainly well on our way to that. There are some things that we're doing that I think are going to take us there. We're certainly neck and neck with that. So here's some of the clients that we work with, right? So you can recognize obviously a lot of these, so most of the big entertainment brands. It's really reached a point where I'd say there aren't too many, certainly film brands that I haven't touched in my 8 years at Animax at this point. Each one is different. Each one has its own challenges, but also its own, excitement with it. So yeah, when I started Animax, I did this is some of my concept work for some figures that we did very early on. These were all static figures for a 25th anniversary kind of celebration back in 2014. And I'm going to show some more stuff, but some of it is IP protected. So all of you who are here, you can see it, but we'd like to not record it in jazz. And so the other big project that we had recently, kind of the next step, is what we call Adam. So it's a character we named Adam, which was during COVID, obviously a lot of entertainment was being shut down left and right. A lot of our contracts were drying up. Our leadership was able to convince our parent company to keep the team together, that the value of the company was really in the team and the knowledge of the artisans and all the technological folks and technical folks. And so we took on something that's always been challenging and that really doesn't exist in the industry, for at least an affordable price, is a human robot, right? A quality human robot. Basically, the Walt Disney Company are the only ones who've ever done that before. And it's not particularly affordable, right? They can do it internally, but they spend tons and tons of money on R&D to create this. So Adam was our foray into that. It was designed in about 3.5 or 4 months, and then built in about 3 months after we had all of the stuff together. And then we spent a couple of months animating it and presented it last fall at the IAAPA conference, which is a big theme park convention that did happen every year. This was the first one last year after COVID had hit. So Adam has 48 functions, and the idea of it is that it's IP agnostic, which means that it can be turned into any figure. This is the prototype and just the mechanism of the prototype. So skins and skin systems and costumes and all that are customized, and some of the test ones are still in the works. But this figure can move really beautifully and really fluidly. We're also working on some form factor stuff, right? Like shrinking the shoulders, shrinking the elbows, shrinking the wrists as much as possible. Because it turns out the mechanical stuff, to be highly engineered and functional and not break, needs to take up space. So that's kind of a constant challenge that we run into. But here's Adam.
Oh, sure. Yeah, pirates are another popular casting choice. Hold on, let me just get character here. Aye, me brethren, there are uncharted waters to be sailed, all right. But I tell ye, the only thing better than a fair wind at your back is a good first mate, the reliable sort. One who can do the job as assigned. Someone who follows instructions to the letter. What do ye think, me lads? Would you hire a robot to work aboard ye clipper? Just bring me some oil. The salty air likes to make me joints freeze up. Go on then. This is great. What else would you like me to recite for you?
So there you go. So that's Adam. And as we look at kind of the future, really thinking about what we do next, because what we've done in the past has traditionally been building robots, which are super cool, and bringing them to life for guests, but is really the next steps of robotics. So we have an R&D institute that's actively working on interactivity, right? We actually have two projects right now that have pretty serious interactivity. We're working on mobility, right? So you've seen Boston Dynamics. So how can we make a character like Adam not be stuck on the ground, but actually able to walk around? And then the next thing is engage, right? So tactility, something that can touch things, it can grab things, it can throw. Most robots have a wide berth of safety because they can electrocute you or harm you or smash you. And so trying to create those dynamic systems that allow it to interact. Then gamification, which is kind of a combination of a lot of these things, right? How do we make a character that actually participates in games and problem solving, interacts with guests in interesting ways? And then how do we integrate those better into all the other kind of media that exists? So projection, different special effects, different other types of media that are used all throughout the kind of experience design industry. So whether that's water, underwater robotics is a big thing that people are working on. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges out there that are very cool for that kind of stuff. So that is kind of who I am in the background of Animax. So I'll give it back to you, Jazz.
Oh my gosh, Josh, this was amazing. Ah, so good, so good. So for you all that are in the room, send us your questions because I have a lovely list of questions to ask Josh. But Josh, thank you so much for this presentation. I really learned a lot. I too was obsessed with theme parks as a kid, and when I went to go and get my master's, I did my MFA working in theme parks, primarily abroad in Portugal. So the fact that I'm getting to talk to you, I'm so good, just fantastic. So yes, please put your questions in the chat. In the meantime, I will ask you some questions. I have a bunch of them, but I actually want to start kind of going back to your UChicago days, and then also thinking about where you are now working on, animatronics and the technical sides of things. So as someone with both a theoretical and an artistic background, did you have to learn the technical sides of the animatronics trade? If so, how and when did you do that? Yeah,
that's a great question. I would say, every day is an education in the technical side for me, right? Because every day, we were joking before the start of this with dealing with technology and getting it to all hook up, that it always feels like it's fighting you. Every day is new problems and new solutions, right? New challenges, I guess is a good spin on it, right? Of course, we always work under deadlines, which is extra fun because we're delivering product, so we have to make it work. But yeah, for learning that, it's really been a lot of on-the-job training for the learning the technical side of animatronics. Being with the company as it grew from mostly puppetry and kind of lower function animatronics that are a lot easier to set up, meant that kind of as we grew, I was able to ask a lot of questions. I'm oftentimes kind of up in the grills of our technical folks and asking them stuff and trying to troubleshoot with them. Because I really enjoy that side of it too. Even though I'm technically on the creative side, I really want that bridge to be something that always exists, right? And I encourage all of the artists on my team to be engaging in that technical side as well and really working with the engineers. So we sit through design reviews. So I learn a ton of stuff about engineering through design reviews, learn a ton of stuff about control systems and software setups and all that through that as well. I would certainly say I'm in no way an expert, right? It'd be very difficult for me. It takes a village for this stuff. It'd be very difficult for me to go build an animatronic by myself without a significant amount of help. given the division of labor we have. But I certainly like it's taken 8 years, and I still oftentimes am like learning new things about, you know, I ask the engineers oftentimes to send me the stress analysis for the engineering that we're doing. There's a company that we work with that does, they do a lot of our analysis work, and they build out for us, it's called an IK table, and it basically allows us to connect to the figure with that Maya program. It kind of creates almost like a giant point cloud of where the figure can be in space. And so then when we animate it, it's kind of reading up that IK table and telling it where the different motors are allowed to go. And so there's a guy named Krishna there who's amazing, who he and I have talked about a lot of stuff, and I will call him and get technical information from him. So I wouldn't say I learned it anywhere except off on the job.
Absolutely. Great. And then also kind of thinking, right, like you have a background in mathematics, but then also, you know, you have, I like to say, survived the core. You know, finals weeks is coming up soon. So you have this like theoretical mathematical background, this liberal arts background. How do you think that influences your work?
I definitely see like I said, when I think about U of C and what I left with from U of C, some of it was, you know, cool books that I read or interesting, you know, ideas that I engaged with. But really the biggest part of it was teaching me how to take an argument, or teaching me how to take, you know, something, whether it's a literary argument or a mathematical argument or some kind of argument that's being done, and break that down into its constituent pieces of like, what is this literary argument based? Like, what are the assumptions it's made off of? And how is it building its argument from those assumptions? And similarly with you know, whatever theorem you're proving in math or whatever problem set you're dealing with, is how do I get from point A to point B, and do that in this really analytical kind of way. So I think that, and it feels weird for me to be on the creative side and talking about things in such kind of an analytical way, but I do think that's a side that I bring to this industry and that I can bring into my work. Sometimes it's just art and it's by feel, right? Sometimes it's just subjective. Like, no, I don't like the way this is curving. I think it's going to look better if it curves this way, or I think it's going to look better if the head tilts a little bit this way. Because I just feel like there's the gut thing that you get just over time and education and experience. But yeah, that's where I really see it kind of feeding in. And I think it also has really helped I deal with everybody in the shop. You know, if I'm critiquing people or reviewing their figure finish work, or if I'm dealing with animators, or if I'm talking with technical people to try to technical problem solve, if I'm dealing with project management, if I'm dealing with engineers, it's really all over the board, sculptors, mold makers. So I also really need to know how their worlds work and be able to speak into their world and understand their assumptions and understand their worries and their things that they have to deal with to get their part of the process done. And again, that's learning on the job too, but I think that U of C taught me a lot of that as well, as far as that breaking things down to their pieces, because everything we build is made of, you know, like hundreds of thousands of decisions have to be made to make a single dinosaur operate.
Absolutely. I wanted just to kind of stress that for this, because sometimes we're like, oh, I love the core, but I also am like, what am I supposed to do? It's good for you. Listen to Josh. See, like it works itself out. Trust yourself. All right. So you took quite a jump going to like animation mentor, right? Like you were in the government and you're like, okay, I'm doing animation. So I'm like, any advice to others that might be in similar situations? How do you know when a direction is wrong for you and when you need to go into the right direction? Like, and can you even know such a thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have also reconciled with myself that there's no perfect place, right? Or there's nothing that will satisfy all of my interests in life, right? So I don't see necessarily any situation that I'll find that covers everything that I like to do. But I think for me, and you know, there are going to be people who would be in the exact same situation who would make a different calculus, right? And who would decide, you know what, I really have enough of a passion for what I want to accomplish with the law, or what I want to accomplish in whatever career direction I'm going into. For me, it was the combination of the personal side of other people recognizing that there was kind of this artistic side that I really had loved, that was not really being expressed. And quite frankly, professionally, like, I mean, I was drawing pictures on like notes that I would be taking in FBI interviews, and had a couple times had lawyers tell me, hey, Josh, you need to do that on a different page because we have to turn these in for discovery, right, for the trial. So somewhere out there, there are, discovery files with random caricatures all over them, or cartoons on them. So that certainly helped tell me what I should do. I mean, I think nobody can make the decision for you, but I think getting input from others on that's a value I learned from Animation Mentor. Is really a big part of animation is learning to give and take critique, right? Because it's all such a collaborative, that's such a collaborative industry, right? Nobody makes a film on their own, like a real film. It takes hundreds and hundreds of people for any of the big studio films. And so everyone has to get a thick skin and ability to kind of look outside their own work and look outside themselves to get that feedback of, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? What do I need work on? And then be able to give that to others. And so that really helped me as well, right? Is I ultimately made the choice myself, but it was after a lot of kind of consultation with friends and family and other people who could kind of speak to me about what they saw about me.
Absolutely. So beyond the job you're currently in, what are some of your big picture career goals? How have they changed, or have they changed at all since since you're here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of those things I'm kind of going in a little bit of those directions right now. I've really, in my 8 years of being at Animax, I've really enjoyed it, and I've loved being able to work with a lot of the intellectual properties that I get to work with. It's fun to do the dinosaurs. It's fun to do Disney characters. It's fun to do all these things that really inspired me growing up. But certainly the career direction that I want to do more of is more kind of creation from the ground up, right? I'm excited with our parent company. They have a creative studio that I'm really getting kind of more and more enmeshed into, of developing both unique IPs and also some of the licensed stuff as well. I have a lot of passion for museums and education, and I really want to see those sorts of educational institutions. They oftentimes don't have big budgets like theme parks do. I'm really passionate about finding ways for people to engage, for guests to engage, for whoever's coming to do, whether it's a museum or whether it's a living history experience or whatever, that kind of that immersive experience, to take it to the next level. Because I think that there's a lot of opportunity for bringing kind of the experience design themed entertainment world into the educational space, not to lessen the educational value, but to give people a different way to understand things that's not just paragraphs written on a plate.
Absolutely. We share a very similar vision. We should continue chatting after this amazing talk. But speaking of like education, like what types of experiences, like educational entertainment, do you think like animatronics provide? Let's start there. What do you think some of the learning objectives are?
Yeah, I think, there's both like the making of, right? I'm always a huge fan of how things are made, right? I tend to love sketches a lot more than I like final pieces. And so in terms of education, like animatronics is cool because it's STEAM, right? In like one package. It's all the science, technology, engineering, art, and math in one big thing, right? Or one cohesive whole, and that's something I love about it. So teaching people kind of the process of robotics and development of those kinds of things. But when I think about how animatronics can be used, again, like in that museum space or that experiential space, right? How can we bring, again, like one of my passions is history. How can we bring history to life again in a way that really, really feels alive? And that's where AR and VR come into connection. That's where, again, gamification, like how can you experience making choices or being in someone else's shoes, right? I think there's been a lot of cool VR, AR experiences that give the opportunity for people to experience the life someone else either is currently living or has lived in the past, and really step into someone else's shoes. And so I think that a combination, like it's not just exclusively animatronics, but animatronics have their place and can affect storytelling in a specific way and feel very real and present. And that's what I love about the kind of the physical nature of them. Certainly, like, imagine if you could meet, not just saying on humans, but imagine if you could like interact with extinct creatures, right? and get a better understanding of conservation by what's been lost and what can never come back again when you realize this is just a robot, or this is just an AR experience, or this is just something that's not really there. So I think there's a lot that can be done in kind of those spaces.
Absolutely. This makes me so excited. I'm like, please, like, make this exhibit in a museum. But so speaking about like animatronics, we're going to continue this. Like, what are some considerations you take when producing animatronics that are distinctly different from the considerations of producing like people, like robots? Yeah. Do you understand the question I'm trying to ask?
Like industrial robots?
Like industrial robots. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So like an animatronic obviously is covered in stuff that an industrial robot doesn't need. So like if I'm covering a monkey with fur and silicone and foam and fleece and all this other kind of stuff, they're totally different considerations that we have to take into account. The other thing is just how dynamic what we're doing is, right? That we're throwing these things around in a way that industrial robotics are generally made to just, move, shift, down, like do something in this really repetitive kind of way. And more we're creating things that aren't repetitive at all, right? The traditional animatronic just runs through a loop over and over again, right? Like you go through a ride and it does the same loop over and over. But we're doing a lot more interactive stuff. I mean, literally just at work today, we had a client in town and we're working on an interactive character that has about 40 minutes of total animation that it can do across 2 different experiences. But it's made up of over 100 different shows that can be triggered at different points and controlled by different people. And so there's, that's the kind of stuff we have to deal with. We're always fighting motors. We're told that they can push they could push a semi up a hill, and then it turns out that like foam and fleece is too much for them and they resist. Because everything we're doing is making stuff out of things that are not meant for that purpose, right? So we're using materials that you get from your Home Depot, or you get from an art store, or you get from industrial robotics, but they're not made to do what we do. And so we're having to always find workarounds. The softwares we use are not made to do what we do. And so we're having to force them to do what we want them to and pull what we can out of them.
That's awesome. All right, so some questions about you working as a creative director. We have a question from Helen Joe. So I've heard people say that when your hobby becomes a job, you lose your original passion for it. This has made me uncertain about entering the arts and entertainment industry. What do you think about this concept? Has it been true for you?
That is a great question. I definitely think that in some ways, yes, it is true. And in some ways, no, it's not true. Everything that you work on as a job does at some point become a job, right? So there are things that I can enter into now. I mean, even like, again, the thing I was working on today can feel very exhausting because we've been working on it for well over a year. We're trying to get it done, but I'm to an extent, like I want to get it over the finish line, but you reach a point where you're kind of over it as well. It's like classes that you take at UChicago where you're so excited when the course catalog comes out one quarter, and then 8 weeks later, you're like, why did I do this? This is awful. And then the new course catalog comes out and you're like, oh, a new course catalog. And you keep kind of repeating that same, I guess that's the definition of insanity, right? You keep getting excited about the same thing. For me, the thing that keeps me engaged and really excited is pulling people in who get to see it for the first time. So I like, if I get to show my kids a video or bring them into the shop and they get to experience this thing and really feel like it's a real dinosaur or a real cartoon character and I get to see their passion for it, or other people bring in their kids or bring in friends and family. I'm blessed enough that I oftentimes get to see the things that we install. Like I get to travel and actually see it in the guest space, and I get to see it as guests interact with it. And that's hugely inspiring too. So certainly, again, everything you do kind of becomes a job, and there are negatives about every job. There's not everything is always roses and wonderful, but you got to find ways to keep yourself motivated, right? And there are going to be things that disappoint you about it, that surprise you about it, but also what I like about this is it keeps me learning, right? I never feel like I'm in a stasis. And for me, that's hugely motivating, is to always be learning something new. And if I wasn't learning something new, then I'd really be kind of at a point where I needed to escape.
Absolutely. We have another question from Mary A. What technical skills are relevant for your job?
So for me, probably the biggest skills, so 3D animation for me is huge, for me to be able to understand how Maya works, in particular that software, but understand kind of the process of rigging, the artistry of animation, how motion and anatomy works. On a technical side, for me as a creative director, there's less of a sort of need for me to have technical knowledge, and it's more just a benefit for me to have technical knowledge. Most of the creative directors that I work with, like our clients or people from other companies, I mean, I've been told that I'm unique for a creative director and that I care about the engineering and the technical and how that stuff works. Because I think a standard art director or creative director really only thinks about purely the aesthetic or purely the final show, but they're not thinking about how it's done, challenging the ways that it can be done from a technical standpoint, not just a creative standpoint. Thinking about operationally how it can be managed. That's a huge thing that we deal with, is a lot of creative directors care about how it looks on day one, but they're not thinking about how it's going to look on day 367. So that's a big thing for us as well.
Absolutely. And so how does your animation and character design knowledge before Animax differ or translate to animatronics?
The biggest challenge that we run into is when you're animating in a computer, you can do whatever you want, right? There's no limitations. You can push stuff, pull stuff, break stuff apart, put it back together. When you're working with real materials, with real limitations, with power draws and material stretch ratios, durometers of materials, all that kind of stuff. What I find is that it's like painting with a really limited palette. And so you can either get mad about that, or you can find kind of how that's a cool challenge of how can I make this the best it can be. Sometimes we have characters where the client's budget is really only like 2 functions or 3 functions, which seems like you couldn't bring something to life with that. But part of my job and my team's job is to figure out how can we bring the maximum experience out of this thing when it's limited. Mm-hmm. So that's some people get frustrated from that. And that's something when I hire people, when I'm looking at animators, I usually bring them in from kind of an animation background, and I really need to talk them through what this world looks like. And they need to be someone who's going to be excited about that challenge and not frustrated and exhausted by that challenge.
Absolutely. So kind of continuing on the concept of like stakeholders, when do stakeholders get brought into the design process? Is it at the start? Is it at the end? Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, throughout. So, so generally they're brought in at the very beginning, right? And so they bring us kind of the basic brief of what they're looking for, and we'll talk through the best ways to go about that. Usually there'll be kind of a creative development phase that I'm really interacting with the client and then with my team to make sure that we're figuring out the intent that they want. And then they'll check in throughout the period on design reviews, making sure we're still on track with the intent. If we run into issues, or if we find we can't fit something into the space, or it's going to move more slowly, or there's some issue, then we try to find solutions for that, but also bring them into those conversations, especially if it's going to change kind of a branded character or something, to give them really the say in how we go about that. And then obviously all the way through to the end with all the finishing and the final animation. Again, part of what we were doing today was one of my animators was sitting there and getting animation feedback from a creative director he was giving her the really detailed, like, make it blink right here, we're getting into the real nitty gritty of this character. Mm-hmm. So it's up to and including that.
Mm. So then how does a creative director grapple with engaging fans of a franchise? Like, a lot of the franchises that you're working for have like huge fan bases, and we know that fans are just like out here, sometimes being great, sometimes being terrible. So how do you as a creative director deal with all of those things?
Yeah, luckily I'm generally one step removed from that. Honestly, one of the toughest things in my job is if I do not have the final say over the brand, and if they make choices that I don't like about the brand, especially if it's a brand that I'm passionate about, that I'm a fan of, that I'm just like, ugh, I don't think this is a good idea. I mean, I try to guide folks if I have particular opinions, and if I have a good relationship with them, which I do with most, then I can at least get a hearing whether they agree with me or not. And because so much that we do is under NDAs and we can't talk about, we really I am a step removed from the fans themselves. They tend to not know that we worked on stuff, quite frankly, unless they're like friends or family. So yeah, so we're a little bit removed from that.
Nice. I feel like that's a great place to be sometimes.
Yeah.
Another question from Mary A. Do you find adults having a harder time suspending their disbelief in animatronic scenes, or are they also like kids who mostly love this type of animation?
It's all over the place, but I would say it's far more generally when people are entering the space where they're going to engage with these things, when they're coming into the experience, they're already in a state of where they want to be suspending disbelief, right? So when you're going on a ride or you're going to see a show at Disney, if you're somebody like me who's in the industry, then you're going to be sitting there critiquing everything, which that is a negative of working this industry, right? It's harder for me to just sit back and enjoy stuff. But your average guest is really going to give you a lot of freedom and a lot of leeway because they want to be entertained. They want to enjoy it. They want the experience. I would definitely say it was fun. Like when that T-Rex first went, that T-Rex gets really close to you, quite frankly. Like I wish that we had installed like a hot breath in the back of its mouth because it gets so close. You could feel that if it were there, like a spit kind of thing. That's a really fun one to watch because parents and kids, like everybody who's there just is so engaged with this dinosaur as it's swinging itself around. Nobody is paying attention to like, they're not looking for the track. They're not looking for the things going wrong. They're in the story. One of the things I learned with animation early on is that if the animator has done their job well, then nobody knows you did your job, right? Because they're so engaged in the story, they're not paying attention to anything else. And so that's always kind of my goal with what we're doing, is to make both adults and kids forget that it's a robot they're interacting with, but just be so immersed in the story itself.
That's great. So I have a bunch of questions that are kind of like related to like applications, like how do I get into this industry? So can you talk a little bit about the jobs that exist within the industry, the people that you work with, so that our students can have a better understanding of like what's out there, what job titles are there?
Yeah, they're all over the place. So, on the creative side, there's like creative director, art director, there's lots of concept artists and graphic designers and animators. There's within the broader themed entertainment industry, there's a lot of people who are doing like conceptual design work, right? Master planning. There's a lot of both big groups like the Universals or the Disneys, and also a lot of kind of smaller agencies that offer those kinds of services. On the technical side, lots of opportunities for software development, lots of opportunities for people who work in hardware or electrical, tons of opportunities for engineers who want to do something that's a little weirder, a little kind of off the books. If you're someone who's interested in fabrication or costuming, sculpting, mold making, all that kind of stuff is out there too. Assembly technicians are a huge thing. I don't know if people would necessarily think of that, but if you want to really get your hands dirty, then those are opportunities at all the parks and things, of being someone who actually, we find some of our best employees are people who have lived with these figures, especially a lot of the old ones, like they worked for Universal or Disney and dealt with animatronics that were built in the 1980s and have to figure out how to make them operate when all the parts don't exist anymore, that kind of thing. That brings a real cleverness out. So yeah, and if people are wondering about organizations or anything to kind of learn more about it, certainly IAPA is one. IAPA is kind of a broader one if you're looking specifically kind of in the world that I'm in, which is the more theme park specific and immersive experience specific. It doesn't have like the Dippin' Dots and the food and beverage and the laser tag and those kinds of things. The TEA, which is the Themed Entertainment Association, is getting involved with the TEA is huge. I mean, it's not, the themed entertainment world is not very big. It's a relatively small industry, honestly. And so the TEA is a great way to connect in there. Museums, the American Alliance of Museums, AAM, is a good connecting point. Yeah, or try to get like internships with like Disney and Universal have huge internship opportunities, and those are great ways to get connected into Imagineering or Universal Creative. We actually just started our intern class today, so we have like 15 interns who just started this morning, which is fun. So we have one intern who's doing character art. So as a character artist for us. Yeah, it's very broad. There's so much out there because it's so interdisciplinary.
Mm. And can you describe a little bit of like what an internship was like? Yeah.
Yeah, for us, an internship, depending on, so it depends on what your department is.
Right,
So
absolutely.
we do paid internships. So we try to avoid having just like a, go make copies or get coffee kind of internships. We want people
Wonderful.
actually engaged in the process. So I've got some projects for our intern this summer that I think is going to be really good for her. We actually have one like not internal project, it's an external project that I think is going to be really good for her because it's we're doing a whole bunch of things for a theme park that's being built, but they're relatively simple things. So they're a great intro to single function or double function kind of figures and props that don't require kind of the same finesse that you'd expect from like an atom with 48 functions, which honestly, I think that with a couple months, she could be trained into doing that as well. So for me, that's what an internship is going to look like. It's going to look like someone who is an employee before for the summer and really making sure that there's time to meet up with her and talk through kind of what she wants to do, what her interests are, making sure she's meeting other people and getting to know the industry and our shop well. So also she can know what's out there. She's from an animation background, so she's kind of like where a lot of the people who come in, at least that's the pathway that a lot of people come into my department from, where when they discover physical stuff, right? They're blown away by it because they're like, oh, I always saw this in theme parks, but never thought about this as a job or never thought about. So I really want to make sure that she gets kind of a real distillation of what it is to work in this industry, see if she wants to do that, or if she wants to go into games, or if she wants to go into film, or if she wants to go in a different direction.
Absolutely. That's great. Can you talk a little bit about like building a portfolio towards entering the animatronics industry? Like what would that look like, especially if people are coming primarily from animation?
Yeah. I find for me, animation, at least creative animation, is one of the few remaining industries, I think, where a degree really doesn't matter, quite frankly. Like when I look at a resume, actually when I'm sent an application, I glance at the resume, but I really don't care that much. Like if they got, 3 degrees from Harvard and Yale and the U of C, or if they, are just working like at some small local job, if they have a good demo reel, if they can show that they have the skills, then that's what I call people back for. That's what I'm looking for, is someone who can show they know body mechanics, someone who can show they can bring something to life. For animatronics specifically, I would watch like Adam Savage, Mythbusters, special effects people, like watch that stuff and become a tinkerer, right? That's the other way people come to us, not necessarily to my department, but to Animax itself, is people who are tinkerers, who make stuff move, who build stuff, who solve those cool problems, make Rube Goldberg machines, make their own, robots come to life, to show that they had that mindset and that interest. That there's another intern that we have who's going to be on, I believe she's in the software team, who a bunch of departments were fighting over her because she had just this really cool resume of she had made her own kind of puppets and animatronics that she was making come to life just out of stuff she had gotten from Home Depot and Michael's and that she picked up off the internet.
That's so cool. Yeah. Oh my gosh. From another question from Mary A. So going into arts is not poverty?
Yeah, certainly I've been lucky enough to find a job in this world. There's certainly a lot of artistic professions you can find that are out there that are looking for people who can think outside the box and people who can work well with others and people who can bring cool ideas to the table and also and for us collaborate well. That's a huge thing, because I think there are a lot of artists out there who and more power to them, they tend to find themselves in the fine arts world, who really have like deep personal visions and desires to express themselves in less of a collaborative way, which is fine. I would certainly say, like, for us, and again, for the world of animation, for the world of filmmaking, it's so collaborative. You need to be a really good teammate. You need to be a really good coworker. You need to be a really like defend your ideas, bring your ideas to the table, and everybody should speak up about what they think, but also realize you win some battles, you lose some battles. Sometimes you have to compromise, sometimes you have to go in different directions, which that can also be a hard thing for artists, right? It's like, I know we have a lot of artists who have to, they get multiple levels of critique, right? Like if an art director looks at it, then I look at it, and a client art director, then potentially the client, like Universal Creative, they don't own the Harry Potter properties, and they have to go to the Harry Potter, or they have to go to, there's a lot of like levels that you have to go through. Disney, you have to go through Lucasfilm for Star Wars stuff, and you have to go through the Disney creative director, and you have to go through, there's just like, so being able to deal with kind of layers of critique in that way, and not lose your interest, or not kind of lose heart in the thing you're doing. That's also a big thing just for successful artists, at least in my industry.
Absolutely. I have a question. So I know you take undergrads. Do you take grad student interns as well? Like, I'm thinking of someone like Jazz who does like, things with smell and things like.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we do. It's really, we do any intern, undergrad or grad. So actually the one who did the puppets and all the folks we're fighting over, she's actually a student at, I believe it's UNC, just started, the University of North Carolina has just started a character animatronics program. And she had gone into that program. It literally just started this past year. It was founded by a friend of mine who's a former Imagineer, who's a really cool guy. So if anybody's interested in this world, that's another direction. If you want to, there aren't many degrees out there for this stuff, but if you want this world, look into that program that they've just begun. She came from that, and that's a grad program. So yeah. That's
awesome. Yeah, because I was like, when you're talking about hot breath from the, I'm like, Jazz could probably do that. Okay, I was just advocating for my good grad student Jazz. So, we have a few more minutes left. If you have any final questions, please put them in the chat. I guess, do you have any like final words, recommendations for people who are watching this? Any like words of wisdom?
I don't like to think of myself as being much of a font of great thoughts or anything, but I think that just the big things of my experience and where I've gotten today are, one is that it's okay to meander a bit in your career. It's okay to try things out and then go into something else, and then going into something else, and also like sometimes that's really hard as well. Sometimes you spend a lot of time doubting yourself. Sometimes you have to just keep working and working and working. Like the number of things that I had to draw, the number of things I did poorly, the number of interviews I had to do before, in my case, I kept updating something and somebody happened to see it who reached out to me. I didn't even apply for the job originally. So producing content is huge, and putting yourself out there. That's a big thing. So it can also be really scary to put yourself out there and put your work out there. And I look at stuff that I did in the past that I feel like is kind of cringy when I think on it now. But it was part of my process of artistic growth, of learning what I was doing and figuring it out. And so that's huge. And then being willing to get feedback from others as well to get better. And network, everybody talks about networking, but like honestly, reach out to people. Most people in this industry, especially, are super nice. They might ghost you because they're all really busy, but they generally want to help. So you might get a 1 out of 5 kind of response rate, but the people who are willing to get on a quick phone call or have coffee or do something just to kind of give you some feedback is huge. And I say that to myself as well. Like, it can be hard to just reach out, cold call to somebody or someone who you're interested in their career. But again, worst case happens is somebody says no, or they're kind of a jerk, which is, again, it happens, but I think it's pretty rare, at least in this industry.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, Josh, thank you so much for such amazing insight in your presentation. It was so awesome. Are there any final questions for Josh in the chat? Is everyone just like, this was amazing, your minds were blown, you're sitting there just like, is wonderful. Jazz, are there any announcements that I should be making at this moment in time?
Yeah, I can take over for a couple minutes, then we'll just have like a nice break, which is going to be great for everybody. So for those who are joining first, a round of applause for Josh, because that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for anyone who's going to be listening later, this is really, really cool. You missed out on some pretty cool work that was shown behind closed doors.
It will never be seen.
So this has been part of the series that we've been doing with alumni, and it's the last one for this quarter. But if you enjoyed this, definitely let us know for the next quarters. For those who are part of the one-on-one meetings, so for those who don't know about this, not only do alumni come back like virtually to hang out and talk with us and present their work, we're also organizing one-on-one meetings so you can talk to them individually, and this applies to alumni as well. So Josh, if you ever see someone that's of interest to you, you can also register for a one-on-one meeting with another speaker in the future. Nice. But basically for people that have a confirmed one-on-one meeting, stick around after the break, and you will be put into a breakout room. And if you really like, so Ash and I are experimenting on this. It's the first time we ran this at the MADD Center, the first quarter. So we really appreciate everyone's patience and everyone kind of engaging with this a lot. And if you have any feedback about this, or you're like, oh, I really want to hear more about this, or this other topic, or this, I'm really curious about this and I'm freaking out because it's like the quarter where I'm graduating or something, you should be emailing us right now. Like open your Gmail or whatever you use and like start frantically emailing us with ideas for future programming. I have one question actually for Josh before we go on break. I'm just very curious, what's Animax's like work culture like? Like, is it very social? Is it vibrant? What's Nashville like? I have never been to Nashville actually.
Nashville is growing like gangbusters. It is very, I mean, in the last 8 years, it's grown like crazy. I think at one point, I don't know if this is still the case, at one point it was like 10,000 people a month were moving to Nashville. It was like crazy growth. So there's definitely the weight of that, but what's cool about it is, you know, it just means there's more and more stuff that's being kind of built and created. And as far as like city life, you know, it's certainly a smaller city than a place like Chicago, but it's definitely come into its own with culture and restaurants. It's not just like a quiet country music town at this point. So it's a cool place. It does get hot in the summer, so if you like hot summers, but flowers start to come up in like the beginning of March, which is wonderful, right? So winters are a lot less miserable than it was in Chicago. So you know, 6 in one, half dozen in the other, with whichever teach their own, I guess. But yeah, Animax is, I tell my wife regularly when I come home that like, even if a project is really frustrating, or if there's something like, if deadlines, you know, we work in the entertainment industry, so deadlines can be ridiculous. Everybody wants everything faster and cheaper and even higher quality. So there can be times where, you know, kind of to that question of your hobby becomes a job, or you kind of lose passion. There are days where I come home and I'm just like so exhausted and frustrated. But the thing that has regularly been consistent for me is just how impressed I am with my coworkers. Like, it's so full of just the most unbelievably talented people who I've met, in terms of, again, artisans from all over different industries that bring in really cool perspectives and really amazing skills. So we have former Imagineers, we have people from automation, we have people from aerospace, we have people who work for, you know, like rocket companies or JPL, we have people from film, from LA, who like spend most of their careers doing hair work or fur work or silicone and sculpting work in that kind of world. We have people who come from, you know, cars, and people who, and then also people who are coming right out of school, like very new people who are like really excited. And all of that, I've said it before, there's like, we have 130-ish people, something like that. At this point, it's so big, I don't know everyone well, but there's not a single person who I work with who I don't like working with, who I don't really, who I can't have really fascinating conversations, learn a whole lot from. And then they're skilled outside of, because it brings such an interdisciplinary group, they do such cool things in their spare time. So it's people who are into, like, they make their own instruments, or there's a couple of folks who are like really into doing their own burlesque costumes and stuff like that, which is just like really fascinating. There's people who like they do murals outside of work. There are people who they build their own like Rube Goldberg machines. There's people, it's just lots and lots of really, really cool. Some people like make swords and knives. I mean, it's all over the place. And what people produce is, it's really cool. It's really impressive. And that is also constantly inspiring, right? The work itself that we do is fun, but the people make it even more impressive.
Oh my gosh.
Well, thank you so much for that, and for an amazing response. I think we can give a round of applause for Josh once more. So yeah, thank you so much. And then on that note, I'm going to say that we can all take a 10-minute like bio break, relax for a bit, and then for people that are sticking around for the one-on-one meetings, don't forget to come back at 6:40 sharp. Not Josh, if you need a little more time, you're totally fine. But I just want to make sure people are ready for you. But yeah, thank you so much. And thanks
Great.
everybody for
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for joining.